The sound ripped me out of sleep like a gunshot, a surge alarm, sharp, metallic, screaming from my solar grid console at 2 in the morning. I stumbled out of bed, feet finding the cold floor, heart still thick with dreams. My eyes adjusted to the dim glow of the monitor, and that's when I saw it. An unexplained load spike, 11 kilowatts, triple the normal draw for that hour. My brain scrambled to make sense of the numbers, but then I saw the source. My outdoor charging port. I grabbed a hoodie, phone, and flashlight, the fog in my head evaporating into anger. By the time I stepped outside, the moonlight was spilling over something sleek and white in my driveway. A Tesla Model X, plugged neatly into my private solar charger. And there she was, arms crossed, chin tilted high like she owned not just my charger but the whole block. Karen, the HOA's self-appointed queen of rules. Your charger wasn't being used overnight, she said, zero shame in her voice. Figured I'd save a few bucks. I blinked at her, wondering if I was still, half dreaming. I wasn't. That sentence, that casual theft wrapped in smugness, rewired my understanding of just how entitled someone could be. I had built that solar grid myself, designed every wire, every battery bank, every micro-inverter with the precision of an electrical systems engineer who wanted more than power. I wanted independence. Every panel was a piece of me. Every volt was mine. And here was the same woman who once tried to fine me for unapproved panels, now stealing my energy like she was borrowing a cup of sugar. She had no idea what she'd just started. The first time I'd met Karen was at the HOA's annual meeting. She'd been elected treasurer simply because no one else wanted the job. Within days, she crowned herself Executive Officer of Community Standards and started handing out fines for the absurd. Mailboxes not the right shade of beige, children's bikes left on porches, even excessively green grass because it was unfair to other residents. Most neighbors paid up to avoid the hassle. I made the mistake of standing my ground. When I'd installed an outdoor battery housing by my fence, fully permitted, perfectly matched to my home, she'd called it visually disharmonious and demanded I move it. I'd shown her my city-approved paperwork and told her it wasn't her concern. She didn't like that. A week later, I got a formal HOA violation letter in Comic Sans. I shredded it without a second thought. But this was different. This wasn't about a petty rule or paint color. This was theft. I kept my voice calm. You can't just plug into someone's private energy system, Karen. She tilted her head and smirked. You put it outside, and since we're part of the same community, technically the energy belongs to everyone. My jaw tightened. She was treating my engineered off-grid power system like a public water spigot. Be grateful, she added. I'm charging clean. I'm not burning gas. That's when I knew it. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was war. I didn't shout. I didn't yank the cable. I walked back inside, sat at my console, and hit record. The data showed her vehicle draining 73% of a full charge in just over 4 hours, dozens of dollars in power and measurable wear on my battery cells. Multiply that by who knows how many times she'd done it, and the numbers became something no one could dismiss. I pulled the driveway cam footage. There she was, on multiple nights, sneaking in, plugging in, and strolling off like she was tapping a public outlet. This was no accident. It was a pattern. The next morning, I knocked on her door. I laid it all out. The data, the footage, the cost. I offered a way out. Stop using my port, reimburse part of what she took, and we'd move on. She smirked again. Oh, please, you really think I'm paying you for sunlight? And she closed the door in my face. By the end of the week, she'd filed a complaint against me through the HOA. The accusation? That I was hoarding renewable energy in an exclusionary manner. She even claimed her role as a board member, gave her access to external utility infrastructure, When the violation notice landed in my mailbox, my blood boiled. She'd crossed the line twice now, first physically, then on paper. I wasn't going to play defense anymore. That night, I designed my answer. A decoy-charging port, outwardly identical to my real one, but internally wired to a safe, unstable surge loop. Nothing dangerous, but enough to fry an unauthorized charger and scare the life out of anyone trying to take what wasn't theirs. By Friday, it was installed. A bright yellow sign read, "Private grid, do not use." I knew she'd ignore it. She didn't make me wait long. Saturday night, 1:40 a.m., the surge alert lit my console. I brought up the live camera feed. There she was, pajama pants, hoodie, humming to herself as she plugged into my trap. 10 seconds. Later, the Tesla jolted, hissed, and spat a shower of white-hot sparks. Karen screamed and stumbled back into her lawn, the night sky flashing like the 4th of July. In that moment, watching the queen of the HOA scramble backwards in the dirt, I realized something. I hadn't just defended my grid, I had declared electrical war, and I wasn't done yet. The next morning, I braced for her retaliation. What I didn't expect was a mob. The knock on my door was sharp, fast, and angry. The kind that says, "This isn't a visit. It's a confrontation." When I opened it, Karen stood there with her arms folded so tightly I thought she might snap a bone. Flanking her were 2 HOA board members I barely recognized. Behind them, her Tesla sat in my driveway like a wounded animal, the charger dangling, blackened, and limp. "You tampered." "With my car?" she snapped. No greeting, no small talk. One of the board members, Leonard, a wiry man who wore socks with sandals year-round, cleared his throat. "We just want to talk about what happened last night." I told them to wait, walked back inside, returned, with a thick folder. Inside was everything. Every timestamp, every voltage spike, every still frame from my driveway cameras of her plugging in without permission. I handed it to Leonard. His eyebrows climbed with each page. Karen snatched one from the stack. "This doesn't prove anything," she said. "No lock, no sign until recently. It was outside." I pointed to the camera above my driveway. "There's audio, too. Last night, you said, and I quote, 'Figured I'd save a few bucks.'" Diane, the second board member, shifted uncomfortably. Leonard's face had gone pale. But Karen? She doubled down. "I'm filing a complaint for sabotage. You damaged my property." I shrugged. "You trespassed. You ignored the warnings. And if we want to talk damage, let's talk about what your charging did to my battery bank." She didn't answer. She turned on her heel, muttering into her phone as she walked away, her voice rising into the phrase, "formal incident response." That same afternoon, I received another hand-delivered HOA violation notice, this one claiming I'd installed dangerous electrical equipment without board approval. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped it in the recycling bin. Instead, I set it neatly on my desk, knowing it would look great, stapled to the counter-complaint I was preparing. See, this wasn't my first technical dispute. I'd spent years navigating complex property law and infrastructure regulations, but even I had never imagined I'd be building a case for energy theft in the middle of suburbia. I called my lawyer, a former litigator who now specialized in property and tech disputes. After reviewing the footage, the logs, and the HOA's letters, he said something that stuck. "Put her in a legal corner. Let her show her cards. HOAs don't want lawsuits, they want compliance, and they make mistakes when someone fights with evidence." So I got to work. I printed everything, every spike, every screenshot, every smug little quote she'd said on camera. Then I had my lawyer send her a cease and desist letter, copied to the HOA board, demanding she stop all attempts to access my system or face civil litigation. That was the legal move. The fun move was installing a small digital display at the edge of my property, powered by my solar grid. It cycled through phrases like, "private energy zone, trespassers will be fried, legally stealing sunlight." Really, Karen? I knew she'd hate it. I also knew she'd see it every single time she left her driveway. By the weekend, The neighborhood was buzzing. People slowed down as they passed. Neighbors knocked on my door, pretending to ask about panel efficiency, but really wanting to know what happened. I didn't tell them much, but the footage from the Tesla incident had already made its way to a group of teenagers down the street. They'd added dramatic music, slow motion, and a giant zap overlay before posting it online. The video's title, Tesla, Karen Gets What She Deserves. It exploded. 2 million views in a matter of days. Suddenly, Karen wasn't just our HOA's biggest nuisance. She was an internet cautionary tale. In Tisao, the video you could see her confidently plug in, then jump back, arms flailing as sparks lit up her luxury car. And there, in the background, was my glowing sign. The caption read, "That's what you get for stealing volts, Karen." She tried to keep her head high, walking around the neighborhood like she still ran things. But the cracks were obvious. "People," whispered when she passed. The HOA board's inbox was filling with angry messages from residents who were tired of her antics. One neighbor, Fred, stopped by with a six-pack and said, "You're the hero we didn't know we needed." I wasn't aiming to be a hero. I was aiming for accountability. So when the HOA called an emergency meeting to discuss the energy situation, I was ready. The meeting was held in the community center. Karen sat up front like a dethroned monarch, her eyes scanning the room for support. I sat in the back, my folder in hand. Leonard read through the complaints, mine included, then gave Karen the floor. She launched into her usual justifications. The charger was community accessible. There were no initial warnings, and she only used it during off-peak hours. But then she twisted her tone, painting herself as the victim. He deliberately tampered with the system to cause damage. This is harassment. When it was my turn, I stood and laid out the truth. I handed each board member a neatly indexed packet. I explained how an off-grid solar array works, the risks of overdraw, the costs of replacing drained capacity. I even included the cease and desist letter and photographs of the warning signs. When I finished, the room was silent. Finally, Leonard turned to her. "Karen, you were told not to use that port. You ignored it. This wasn't a mistake. It was repeated unauthorized access. The vote was swift. She was suspended as treasurer, pending review. The violation against me was rescinded. An apology was recommended. I didn't expect one. On my way out, we crossed paths in the parking. "Lot, this isn't over," she hissed. I smiled. "No, it's just beginning." Because what she didn't know was that I still had more than one way to win this war. I thought maybe, just maybe, the public humiliation and board suspension would be enough. That she'd slink into the background like most people do when the spotlight turns unflattering. Karen was not most people. 2 days after the HOA meeting, I stepped outside to grab the mail and saw something that made my stomach clench. My solar control panel's protective casing, custom fitted, bolted with tamper-proof screws, had fresh scratches around the lock, the kind of scratches made by someone trying to force it open. I ran inside, pulled up my backyard security, feed, and there she was, 2:46 in the morning. Karen, dressed in all black like she was auditioning for a discount spy movie, crouched low, tool in hand, working the lock. She kept glancing over her shoulder, muttering under her breath, when her screwdriver slipped. No gloves, no mask, just pure arrogant confidence. She struggled for a few minutes before giving up, but not before flipping off the camera. I sat back in my chair, breathing slowly, torn between disbelief and an odd sort of grim admiration. She'd been suspended from the board. She was facing civil action. She'd had her Tesla half-fried on camera. And still, she thought she could sneak onto my property to tamper with a system she didn't understand. If she'd succeeded, she could have shorted out my battery bank, maybe even caused an electrical fire. This wasn't just entitlement anymore. It was criminal recklessness. I backed up the footage, called my lawyer. Then I called the sheriff's office. The deputy who showed up, Morales, had the calm demeanor of a man who'd seen his fair share of stupidity. He watched the video twice, shaking his head. "She's got guts," he said. "No brains, but guts." He took my statement, filed it as trespassing and attempted vandalism, and promised they'd pay her a visit. The next day, I watched from my office window as 2 patrol cars parked in front of her house. She came to the door in fuzzy slippers, clutching a mug of herbal tea like it was a shield. Her voice carried, too loud not to hear. "This is harassment. He's weaponizing the system against me. Weaponizing the system." From the woman who had literally tried to break into it. I thought that would be the end of it. Surely, with law enforcement now involved, she'd have to back off. Wrong. Karen doesn't back off. Karen escalates. Her next move wasn't sneaking into my yard, it was calling the local news. 2 days later, a white van with a satellite dish rolled into the neighborhood. Out stepped a bright-eyed reporter named Chase Laram and a cameraman who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I was on my porch when they approached. "Hi there," Chase said with that made-for-TV smile. "We're doing a piece on neighborhood, disputes and energy access. Do you have a few minutes to chat?" I raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. Karen's your source?" He laughed awkwardly. "We've spoken to a few residents. I told him I'd talk, on one condition, that I got to show him my side. Inside my workshop, I gave him the grand tour. The off-grid solar array, the inverter logs, the surveillance footage, even the viral video of the Tesla spark." By the end, Chase's eyes were wide. The cameraman, who had been stone-faced until then, finally blurted, "Wait, she really thought this belonged to the HOA?" I nodded. "She didn't just think it. She tried to steal from it. More than once." That night, the segment aired. Karen got her chance to speak first, all about shared community resources and her hostile neighbor. But the piece didn't go the way she'd planned. Halfway through, the sheriff appeared on camera, explaining she was under investigation for trespassing. Then it cut to me, calmly explaining how my system worked, backed by video proof. The anchor closed with, "In this case, the sun may be free, but the infrastructure isn't." I nearly spit out my drink laughing. The interview had done what? No HOA vote or viral video could. It shifted the neighborhood's perception completely. People I barely knew began messaging me. One man 3 streets over said, "She fined me for a flagpole once. Now I see what she's really about." Another left a handwritten note on my porch. "Thanks for standing up to the HOA tyrant. Her carefully built authority had cracked, and everyone could see it." But Karen wasn't done yet. The HOA called another meeting, this time for a public vote. Not just on her reinstatement, but on her removal. She showed up in sunglasses and a scarf, like she was dodging paparazzi. She tried to spin it, claiming she was bringing equity to neighborhood energy use. No one bought it. The vote was 34-2 in favor of permanent removal. The 2 votes for her, hers and her husband's, and he looked like he wanted to disappear into the chair. When the meeting ended, I walked past her Tesla on the curb. It still bore the scorch marks from that first night. Someone had stuck a bumper sticker on it, "Charge responsibly." I didn't put it there, but I appreciated the message. What I didn't know then was that she was about to push things even further, and this time she'd aim straight for my throat. For a week there was silence, which in Karen terms was never good. Silence meant planning. It came back in the form of a letter, not from the HOA, not even from a lawyer. This one had the letterhead of a local environmental compliance group, complete with an official-sounding seal and a paragraph of bureaucratic jargon that could make your eyes glaze over. The accusation? That I was operating an unlicensed energy distribution center on my property. According to the letter, I was harboring unsafe voltage systems without municipal oversight, misapplying renewable energy resources, and failing to comply with local energy ordinances. At first, I laughed. Then I read the fine print. The complaint had been submitted through an anonymous third-party whistleblower platform. Whoever filed it, and I didn't need a detective to guess who, had done their homework just enough to make it look legitimate. Fake ordinance codes, twisted language about public safety, enough red tape to make it look like I'd been running some shady underground power plant. 3 days later, the city sent an inspector. His name was Hector, and unlike the HOA board, he was professional, polite, and, from the way his eyes scanned my setup, clearly competent. He apologized before stepping onto my property. "Nothing personal," he said. "Just have to check it out." I showed him everything. The installation permits, the safety certifications, the system logs. Walked him through the inverters, the battery banks, the emergency shutoffs. Even showed him my anti-theft decoy port, explaining exactly why it existed. By the time we'd done a full walkthrough, Hector was nodding. "Honestly," he said, "this is one of the safest private setups I've ever seen. Whoever filed that complaint doesn't understand how power systems work." We both knew exactly who had filed it. Hector filed his report. No violations, no follow-up needed. But the visit lit something in me. I realized Karen wasn't just trying to win anymore. She was trying to bury me under enough headaches that I'd give up. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. In fact, the universe was about to hand me an opportunity I couldn't have scripted better. It was a Friday night, and the whole neighborhood was at the community center for a Movie Under the Stars event. The place smelled like popcorn and citronella. Kids were chasing each other in front of the big screen. Halfway through the movie, the projector flickered, then died. The popcorn machine sputtered out. The lights went dark. A blackout, not unusual. But the timing was perfect. Within minutes, people were fumbling with flashlights and muttering. And then someone pointed toward my house, just a block away, glowing like a holiday postcard. Porch light on, security system humming, even the ceiling fan on my deck spinning lazily in the summer air. I stayed in my chair, sipping soda, watching the slow turn of heads toward me. That's when Karen stood up, voice sharp enough to cut through the chatter. "See?" she shouted. "This is what happens when someone hoards power. We're all left in the dark while he lives like a king." The irony nearly bent the laws of physics. A woman nearby muttered, "He built that himself." Another man said, "Maybe the HOA should buy solar instead of painting curbs." I didn't say a word. Just walked home, the glow of my own light spilling across the sidewalk. Back at my desk, I pulled up the city outage map. Sure enough, a grid-level fault had taken out power to the whole block, except me. My system had no connection to the cause, but I knew Karen's resentment had nothing to do with logic. It was about control, and the fact that I had something she couldn't touch was eating her alive. The next morning, she crossed the final line. The camera feed pinged at 9:12 a.m., motion in the backyard. I pulled it up, expecting maybe a stray cat. It was Karen. Not at night this time. Not sneaking. In broad daylight, she was crouched near one of my solar panel arrays with a pair of bright orange gardening shears, and she wasn't trimming plants. She was reaching for the thin black cable running from the panel to my inverter, a data line that monitors system performance. She must have thought it was a power cable. The second she squeezed the blades, the motion sensor tripped. An horn mounted on the panel rig went off at point-blank range. The scream she let out could have rattled windows. She fell backward into a pile of mulch, the shears still in her hand. I walked out with my phone already recording. She scrambled too, her feet brushing dirt from her elbows. "I was trimming your weeds," she blurted. "You've got invasive growth along the fence." I looked at the clearly labeled cable, the one that said data line, do not cut. and raised an eyebrow. "That's my sensor line," I said. "Touch it again, and it won't just be a noise complaint." She stormed off, muttering about legal gray areas and overreactions. But I knew exactly what it was, the final piece I needed. That afternoon, I compiled everything. The unauthorized charging, the trespasses, the decoy port incident, the attempted lockpick, the fake complaint, and now, attempted sabotage of a live system. My lawyer didn't even hesitate. "We're filing for a restraining order today. And this time I wasn't just aiming to win, I was aiming to end the war entirely." By the end of the day, the paperwork was filed. The restraining order spelled it all out in black and white. Dates, times, footage, and a long list of violations that painted a crystal-clear picture. If Karen so much as leaned over my fence, again, she'd be facing criminal charges. It wasn't just about keeping her away from my system. It was about stripping her of the control she thrived on. And for someone like Karen, losing control was worse than any fine. But I wasn't satisfied with just the legal win. I wanted something that would stick. Something she couldn't spin in a Facebook post or twist into some martyr narrative. So I got to work on my next move. The upcoming HOA Open Forum was the perfect stage. Normally, these meetings were sparsely attended. A handful of residents, a couple of board members, and enough awkward silences to fill an hour. But word had been spreading about my little war with the former treasurer, and when the night came, the room was packed. I walked in with a rolled-up proposal under my arm. The Solar Education and Energy Boundaries Policy. It wasn't written like a revenge piece, at least not on paper. It was framed as a proactive community guideline, clear definitions of private versus community energy systems, penalties for tampering or unauthorized use, a recommendation for HOA investment in shared renewable projects. It was positive, forward-thinking, and everyone in the room knew exactly who had inspired it. When the floor opened for discussion, I presented it calmly. I explained how property rights and energy independence weren't about exclusion. They were about respect. You wouldn't walk into someone's garage and take their tools without asking. Electricity was no different. People nodded, a few chuckled. Even Diane, the one board member who had clung to Karen's side during the early battles, sat quietly, flipping through my neatly tabbed packet. When the vote came, it wasn't even close. The policy passed with overwhelming support. Karen wasn't there. She'd stopped showing up to meetings altogether, retreating into her house like a storm cloud that had finally run out of lightning. Her Tesla still sat on the curb, unrepaired, the melted port a permanent badge of defeat. Someone had placed a small solar-powered garden gnome on its hood. It wore sunglasses and held a sign that read, "Respect the current." No one admitted to putting it there. But the neighborhood loved it. For me, the satisfaction wasn't in the jokes or the memes. It was in knowing the board had finally codified something that would protect me, and anyone else, from another Karen situation. And just to make the message impossible to miss, I started my final bit of creative closure. Mounted to the post by my gate, just below the solar status screen, I installed a glass shadow box. Inside it, displayed like a rare artifact, was the very Tesla charger cable that had sparked and fried during her midnight plug-in stunt. I'd had it cleaned up just enough to make the blackened, melted metal visible under the glass. A small steel plaque at the bottom read, "Tamper with the sun. Get burned." It didn't take long for it to become a neighborhood landmark. People stopped on their evening walks to look at it. Some took selfies. Kids nicknamed it the Zap Relic. One teenager said, "This is better than any no trespassing sign." I agreed. And the best part? The weeks that followed were quiet. No knocks at the door, no fake citations, no drama. Just the steady hum of my system working exactly as it was designed. Then, one afternoon, I heard a rumor from a neighbor. Karen had put her house up for sale. She told people she needed a change of scenery, but everyone knew the truth. Her reputation was scorched beyond repair. Buyers kept pulling out once they heard the Tesla story. One real estate agent even told me the viral video had come up during showings. "People ask about the crazy Tesla lady," she said. "It's kind of become neighborhood folklore." I wasn't one to gloat publicly, but I also wasn't going to pretend I didn't feel a deep, satisfying click as the whole saga finally locked into place. For months, Karen had tried to frame me as selfish, dangerous, even unhinged. But the reality had come out in full daylight, and now her power was gone. I had my legal protection. The neighborhood had my back. The HOA had my policy, and for the first time since that 2 a.m. surge alarm months ago, I could relax without wondering when the next knock, letter, or petty stunt would arrive. The war wasn't just over. I'd won it on every front that mattered. Karen's house sat on the market like a stranded ship, for sale, signs flapping in the wind, but never any real movement. Every time a new buyer came to look, I'd see them wandering the block, glancing at the gnome on her Tesla, noticing the melted charger in my display box and whispering to whichever agent trailed behind them. The showing would end. The house would stay empty. It was as if the neighborhood itself had decided to warn them. You don't want the baggage that comes with this address. Meanwhile, the HOA wasn't just tolerating me now. They were actively working with me. My solar education and energy boundaries policy had made it into the HOA newsletter. Neighboring communities had started reaching out to the board, asking if they could adapt the guidelines for their own use. It was surreal. A year ago, I was the troublemaker with the unapproved panels. Now, I was the example of responsible independence. One afternoon, I was surprised to get an official invitation to speak at the quarterly review meeting. I walked in to find the board, the same people who once rubber-stamped Karen's absurd violation notices, waiting with folders and notepads. When I finished presenting on solar best practices, Leonard cleared his throat and said, "The board has also decided to reimburse you for the damages Karen caused. We'll be using the discretionary emergency budget." I almost laughed right there in the meeting. Getting paid back by the very organization that had once backed her was more than a win. It was poetic justice. But the biggest surprise came a few weeks later, in the form of a letter from the city. Apparently, the local government had been keeping tabs on the story, the news segment, the HOA policy reform, even the viral video. They wanted to nominate me for a Community Sustainability Award. At first, I thought it was a joke. Then I realized they were serious. The ceremony was small, just a gathering at the Civic Center. Folding chairs, a modest stage, a lineup of people doing genuinely good work for the city's environment. When they called my name, the applause was polite, curious. I kept my speech short. Respect your neighbors, respect the grid, and never underestimate the pettiness of people who don't understand either. It got a few laughs. Even the mayor cracked a smile. When I got home that night, I stood at my gate, looking at the panels glowing in the last light of the day. For the first time since the whole thing started, I wasn't just feeling relief. I was feeling pride. This system wasn't just mine anymore. It had become a statement, a reminder that independence and community weren't enemies. They only clashed when someone decided the rules didn't apply to them. And Karen, she was still here, still in that house, still peeking from behind the blinds whenever someone stopped to take a picture of my Zap relic. But she'd gone completely silent. No confrontations, no fake citations, not even a passive-aggressive comment in the neighborhood Facebook group. It was tempting to think she'd finally accepted defeat, but deep down, I knew she was just biding her time. And that was fine. Because after everything she'd tried, the theft, the sabotage, the smear campaigns, I'd learned how to prepare for the next one before it even started. I had the law, I had the neighborhood, and most importantly, I had the voltage. If Karen had an off switch, she either didn't know where it was or had ripped it out years ago. Even after months of silence, I never fully believed she was done. People like her don't disappear quietly. They fade in stages, clinging to, whatever scraps of relevance they can find. Her first stage was the ghost neighbor routine. Curtains drawn, driveway empty, no sign of life except the occasional rustle at the blinds when someone walked past. The second was the martyr act, where I'd hear through the grapevine that she was telling anyone who'd listen she'd been unfairly targeted for trying to help the community. The problem for her was that the narrative had already shifted, and not in her favor. The neighborhood didn't see her as a victim anymore. They saw her as the woman who tried to steal power from a private grid, got electrosmacked in the process, and then doubled down until the law stepped in. The HOA's quarterly meeting confirmed it. The board opened by reading out the latest. Status on my restraining order: permanent. Not a trial period, not a temporary measure. Permanent. I didn't have to say a word. The murmur that passed through the room said it for me. Diane, the last board member who'd shown her any sympathy, voted in favor of keeping the order. That was the moment I realized Karen had no allies left, not even on the board she used, to control like a personal chess game. After the vote, Leonard turned to me. "We've had multiple requests from other HOAs to share your solar policy framework," he said. "If you're willing, we'd like to credit you as the original author." I agreed, hiding the grin that threatened to take over my face. From non-compliant homeowner to policy author recognized across neighborhoods, the arc of this story was starting to feel almost cinematic. But the best part came after the meeting, in the parking lot. I was unlocking my truck when a man I'd never met before, tall, graying at the temples, and walked over and shook my hand. "I work in solar installation," he said. "Heard about what you did here. That's the kind of advocacy this industry needs. Most people don't stand their ground." That hit harder than I expected. I'd spent months in defense mode, fighting fires she'd lit one after another. To hear someone from my own field frame it as advocacy, not just survival, reframed the entire thing. When I got home, the Zap relic was catching the golden glow of the sunset. A small group of kids had stopped to look at it, pointing and laughing. I overheard one say, "That's the crazy Tesla lady's charger." The way they said it, lighthearted, harmless, told me the story had shifted from active conflict to neighborhood folklore. Karen had become a character in a cautionary tale, and I was the one who got to write the ending. And it wasn't just about me anymore. I'd had at least 3 neighbors stop by in the past month to ask how they could start their own solar setups. Not because of tax incentives or green energy initiatives, but because they'd seen what it looked like when you owned your system, understood it, and protected it. That was the legacy she'd never intended to create. I realized then that the war wasn't just over. It had been over for a while. She just hadn't caught on yet. The silence from her side of the street wasn't a tactical pause. It was surrender, and in that quiet, I could finally hear the hum of my system for what it really was. Not just power flowing through circuits, but proof. Proof that I'd fought for something worth keeping. Proof that I'd defended it without crossing the line into the recklessness she lived in. That night, as I locked up the workshop, I caught a glimpse of her through the blinds, standing there, arms crossed, watching the street. It wasn't defiance anymore. It was something smaller, something like acceptance, or maybe resignation. Either way, it was the closest thing to peace we were ever going to have, and I was fine with that. The end came not with another argument, but with the sound of a tow truck. It was early morning when the rumble of a diesel engine rolled down the street. I stepped onto my porch, coffee in hand, and saw it, a flatbed pulling up in front of Karen's house. Her Tesla had been parked there for months, unmoving, the scorched charging port still a visual scar from that night under the moonlight. Now, a man in a reflective vest was winching it up onto the bed, the garden gnome still perched proudly on its hood. No sign of Karen, no goodbye scene, just the slow, mechanical whir of straps tightening and the clunk of the ramp folding away. By the time the truck drove off, the space in front of her house looked empty in a way I hadn't expected. For the first time in a year, the most visible reminder of our war was gone. Later that day, a wooden crate arrived at my door. No return address, just a note taped to the top. For the trophy room. Inside was the Tesla charging cable, the same one that had sparked, hissed, and melted during her midnight theft. The towing company had recovered it, and, having seen the viral video, figured I'd want a souvenir. They weren't wrong. That weekend, I mounted it inside a glass shadow box with a brushed steel plaque, "Tamper with the sun, get burned." It went, right next to the Zap relic display by my gate, under the live solar status screen. It didn't take long for it to become another neighborhood landmark. People stopped to take photos. Some called it art. Kids treated it like a badge of honor for the block. One teenager told me, "Bro, this is better than any neighborhood watch sign." I didn't disagree. And in that quiet that followed, the neighborhood shifted. People started waving when they passed. Strangers stopped to ask about going solar. The HOA, once my biggest headache, began using my property as an example of responsible renewable energy management in their outreach. Karen's house eventually sold, though it took months. The new owners were a young couple who introduced themselves on move-in day. Nice people, curious about the gnome. They'd heard the story, at least the short version, and laughed when they saw the charger display. "It's a good reminder," the husband said. Boundaries matter. Exactly. Looking back, I realized the battle with Karen had never really been about electricity. It was about control, about someone who thought rules were for other people and that community meant whatever benefits me personally. The irony was that by trying to take something she didn't understand, she'd ended up giving me something I hadn't expected. Influence. Not the kind she chased. The real kind. The kind that comes when you defend what's yours without stooping to the same recklessness as the person attacking you. The city's Sustainability Award still sat on my workshop shelf, tucked between my multimeter and a set of spare inverters. Not flashy, not framed. But every time I saw it, I remembered that night in the Civic Center when I stood on stage and told a room full of people, "Respect your neighbors, respect the grid." Because that's all it really came down to. When the sun dipped behind the rooftops that evening, my system kicked into its night sequence. The panels, the batteries, the inverters, all humming in perfect order. I leaned on the gate, looking at the two displays, the Zap relic and the trophy cable. Proof in steel and glass of a simple truth. When you build something with your own hands, when you pour time and skill and patience into it, you have the right to defend it. And if someone decides to poke the current, well, the current has a way of speaking for itself. You've heard this confession. Now wait until you hear the next one.